Hi, welcome to Resonate by the Reconnected. This is Emma and Eleanor joining you again.
Hi, everyone.
We are going to discuss the topic of why we suppress, deny, inhibit, and avoid our emotions.
We
So,
had a great conversation about this on Instagram recently and got a lot of questions about this particular phrase suppress, deny, inhibit, and avoid.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is a big one. And it is something that, when we look at this pattern that comes up for us, we can really get to the root of why most of us struggle to really be with our kids in their really big emotions.
I would say that being with our kids' feelings is the number one question or struggle that parents in the reconnected parenting community have. Would
Yeah,
you agree?
yeah, totally.
I would say every single parent at some point will struggle to be with or know how to handle their children's anger, fear, upset, sadness, frustration, joy, excitement, um, any area where our kids have got big feelings and we struggle to be with them, or an is an area where we actually have a little bit of potential growing to do. And we want to talk about this in the context of suppressing and denying and inhibiting and avoiding. Um, so I wonder if we should just introduce ourselves to anyone who might be tuning in for the first time.
Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Emma. I am the co-founder of Reconnected and as well as Reconnected Parenting, Reconnected Being with Eleanor. I am trained in a mastery in rebirth and breath work. So much of my work is about addressing this suppression, denial, and inhibition of our emotions. And when I started my breathwork training, I had the story of my childhood was fine. It was fine. Everything was fine. Like I was completely suppressing so much. I was suppressing my rage. I was suppressing my joy. I was suppressing my tears. My dearest father, beautiful man, but he had the pattern of don't cry every time I would be in tears. And so by the time I'd hit my adulthood, I found it so hard to freely express my emotions. And it was through my
Mm.
breathwork training that I really got in touch with being able to more freely express these emotions. And then I worked with so many people deep in one-to-one processes where we really went into the deepest, darkest spaces of these suppressed emotions. And so I really fell in love with authenticity. There's really nothing like being with someone in their full expression of what they are truly feeling. I get goosebumps just even tuning into those memories. So I find this topic extremely important because, we've come out of an age of massive suppression. I think back to my grandparents of the 50s, and we are just now really getting in touch with, oh, it's actually okay to have these feelings.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's really big.
yeah.
And if we haven't met, I'm Eleanor, and I'm also a breath worker, but my other training is in counseling and play therapy. I've done a lot of work over the past 20 years in breath work, but also working with children and supporting children who've experienced trauma or loss, to move through and process their big feelings. And I've worked as a family counselor for many years. So the Reconnected is born of Emma and my shared love of conscious parenting. Between us, I've lost count of how many children we have. I was going to say 10, but I think it might be 11 now.
Yep.
And we really connected over our love of breath work, recognized the synergy of breath work and play therapy, and found that the fastest, most effective way for us to be the parents we want to be is to do the work of healing our nervous systems and learn how to be with our kids in a way that helps them to grow up with a connection point to what we call the ventral vagal regulation, which is essentially their true self. Yeah. So that's what we're all about at the Reconnected. And in today's podcast, we want to chat really about this idea of that we're all sitting on suppressed emotions. So I wonder if you've come across these words before: suppression, denial, inhibition, and avoidance. All of us will have some level of suppression, denial, inhibition, avoidance of our emotions and of our feelings. And we find that for parents, parenting can feel like a game of suppression. Like, who here spends their days gritting their teeth, for
Yep.
example?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, gritting their teeth, or pushing away feelings that we don't want to acknowledge, like how we really feel about our children.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
where
Including the guilt, any shame, we can even push down joy.
mm,
There's such a range of emotions that we can really start to suppress when we're in
yeah.
our everyday grunt of parenting, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of pressure on parents, especially mothers, to really enjoy parenting.
Yep.
And in reality, most of us, when we go from not having children to having children, can sometimes really experience a lot of questioning of the decision that we've made, whether we're up to the task. Parenting can bring up really tricky feelings,
Yeah.
like, and deep questioning, of especially if we feel challenged or if the circumstances around us don't support our transition from um, before we have kids to having kids. And not many people, there's not many spaces where we can freely talk about our challenges with parenting. And so most of those feelings really have to be denied. And
Yeah.
they're denied as well because of course, they sit alongside um, a deep love of our children. And so anywhere where we have this incredible conflict between two seemingly polar opposite polar opposite feelings,
Yeah.
we will have to deny some kind of element. Like, conflicting feelings are very challenging. We
Yeah.
can deeply love our kids and still really question whether we are made for being a parent,
Totally.
or really genuinely be struggling with the demands of
Of
parenting.
parenting, yeah. And
Yeah,
everyday life, all the bills, all the things
yeah,
that we've got to do in modern life,
yeah,
we need to do it all. We need to be the
yeah.
homemaker,
And
the
without the support,
maker.
without the support of a village around us, parenthood can feel like a real burden sometimes, through no fault of anyone's, just
Yeah.
purely the way that our culture is set up at the moment.
And can I just ask you, like, for someone who's like, I don't have any suppressed emotions, I'm not in denial of anything,
Mm.
how could they know that they were actually dealing with some suppression, denial, avoidance?
Well, I loved when you said my childhood was fine.
Yes.
And also, yeah, that also simultaneously that you couldn't feel any feelings.
No, totally. And I was triggered by everyone around me. You know what I mean? Everything was triggering. People's success was triggering. Hard times were triggering. So
Mhm.
there was so much avoidance to my truth and my real feelings there. Like
Yeah,
I was
yeah, yeah,
triggered by my kids' big emotions. If my
yeah.
son was crying, it would be, it
Mm.
would rattle my nervous system.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some signs that you're suppressing emotions are um, have feeling numb emotionally. That points to feeling a huge disconnect from what's actually happening, not being able to feel real happiness and true satiation of feeling satisfied, complete, enjoyment of any moment.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about suppressing emotions is we can't just suppress one. You can't just neatly suppress your anger
Yeah.
and then feel fully joyful, you know?
Yeah. When you cap one, you cap all, right?
If you cap anything, you cap everything.
Yeah, totally.
100%. And
Yeah.
so, any kind of, numbness, feeling ripped off, never being able to enjoy yourself fully.
Yeah.
Um, Also this statement, like, my childhood was fine.
It was
Here's,
fine.
here's
Yeah.
an interesting point, right? Um, Sometimes we think that we need to have experienced a traumatic childhood in order to have emotional baggage from our childhood or to have
Yeah.
suppressed feelings from our childhood. But here's a really key distinction. And I've been really wanting to talk about this for ages. So I'm so glad it came up. Most of us, if we didn't experience a trauma, everyone at some point experienced insensitive parenting.
Yes. Or insensitive caregiving, even by teachers,
Yes.
doctors, anyone around them, aunties, uncles.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And when we are young, we are completely dependent on the adults around us. And I want the listeners, I'd love for you to just tune into that. Completely dependent. And at the same time, our nervous systems are at their most sensitive. We're in the building blocks of our nervous system in the first few years of our life. We're completely dependent on our environment and our caregivers for survival. And so ruptures in our relationship or insensitivity to our needs can be experienced as life-threatening. And so here's the interesting definition about trauma. Trauma is not about the event. Trauma is about our perception of the event. And so if we perceive that our life is threatened, then we can have a trauma, we can hold that as trauma in our system. And our like when we experience insensitivity, this might be as simple for a baby as being left in a wet nappy for too long, feeling too hot, um, you know, so, not having basic needs like that picked up on from our caregivers, let alone then, our emotional needs.
Yeah.
Most of our emotional needs as infants are people, even people my age, I'm in my 40s, most of our parents didn't really get it, that we had
No.
emotions.
Well, that's the other thing about, like, there's so much societal influence on how we suppress and deny and inhibit and avoid our emotions, because there's so many of us who it is not okay to get angry. It's not all right to get angry. No, you can't. Crying is weakness.
Mm.
Don't be too happy because you will be unrelatable to others.
Yeah,
There are
yeah.
many threads that
Mm.
have got us into this place of suppressing and denying.
Yeah.
You could
The
really just keep going through all the things.
Yes, and here's the thing. So in moments of insensitivity that we experience as an infant or a young child, um, in order to survive them, we suppress it or deny our own reaction in
Mm,
order to stay connected. So I have worked with thousands of people in one-to-one sessions, hundreds of small group sessions, and then through the Reconnected, Emma, we've worked with tens of thousands of people.
yeah.
And I am yet to meet anyone who has not had a moment where they have had to override their own emotional needs in order to stay connected and in order to survive the perception of I need to survive. So
Yeah.
trauma is determined by a person's perception.
Yeah. So what effects does this have on our kids, this suppression?
Well, here's the point, right? Here's another way that you can tell that you might have suppressed emotions. How okay with your child's expression are you? Just letting that
We're nodding here.
drop. So, you know, every single feeling that you can't be within your children points you to a suppressed emotion within you. It's just that simple.
Kaboom.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a saying at the Reconnected, the children are the gurus. And we mean teachers, the guides, they guide us because they point us back to these moments where it's us that needs someone to be with us in our feelings, you know. So when we emotionally inhibit our emotions, or avoid or deny them or suppress them or inhibit them, it has the same effect on our kids because we will suppress in other people what we can't be within ourselves.
Yeah.
And so this is how generational patterns get passed down.
Yeah.
And at the Reconnected, the cool thing is we are a community of people who are not just talking about this, you know, we are actively doing the work of becoming safe to feel so that we can be one of the first generations of people to hold that safe to feel space for our children.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time. I want to say, talking about insensitive parenting and just how small an experience to an adult can be a very big experience for an infant who is completely conscious, highly sensitive, you know, incredibly intelligent and perceptive,
Yeah.
can bring up a lot for
Yeah.
parents.
It very much can.
Yeah. And I want to say, there's a real mastery in being able to hold that information without going down with the ship around it.
Yeah.
And for me personally, my children fully woke me up to this reality of my suppressed emotions. One of the first things I said when I first experienced breath work and when I got in touch with emotions that had been suppressed, quite literally, no one had ever said to me, you have suppressed emotions. Like
And
you will
you
have,
may dump on your child
and
and you
if you,
may give them those suppressed emotions as well. It
no
may
one
be
had
a
said it to
knock-on
me.
effect. No.
Yeah, no one had said it to me. It wasn't in any of
No.
the baby books. No one tells you when you take your baby home from the hospital, or you know,
Yeah.
it's like it wasn't there. And so when I realized that I had anger from my childhood and that my kids were triggering my anger, and that's why I was getting angry at them and why I couldn't
Yeah.
be with them in their anger, the first thing out of my mouth was, but I've already had children. I instantly saw how much I'd already passed on to my little girl who was 2.5 at the time. And you know, we work with a lot of parents who get racked with guilt when
Yeah.
they come to
Guilt's a
this.
big one.
And it's definitely a process. It's actually why in Reconnected Parenting, before we even start the program, we address guilt because it's a hugely important
And it keeps you
focus.
stuck and it keeps you
Yeah.
within yourself. Yeah.
Yep. But this is an invitation to hold on to this saying, which is um, it 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 really isn't about what happened in the past. It
No.
really is about what happens now, and now that
Yeah.
you have this information.
Yeah. That was one of the most awakening things through my process of going from it's fine and I'm super suppressed and not acknowledging some of the hurt and the pain that I had experienced over my life to fully feeling it and being with it, which was a process in itself. Of course, it's very different and, sometimes intense to feel the anger or the grief that has been suppressed for so long. But the best part about it all is the level of compassion for self and for others that is available on the other side. And the knockdown of this idea of perfection. Yeah, that was the biggest aha moment for me, because when I was in that suppressed state, my idea of parenting was coming from these gentle parenting books of perfection. And when I realized what we're actually all about as humans, I realized that that was a totally false goal, and that there is literally no such thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And for example, it's interesting we're talking about this today, because I actually had such an incredible conversation with one of my teenagers last night where I laid it all out. I literally said, you know how you got angry at me yesterday? Do you know that that comes from a time when I made you stop feeling how angry you were when you were little? Do you know that if you don't deal with that anger, it, you know, it comes out here and we can handle it. But in the future, if you blame me for making you feel that way, at some point, someone else you love, these same feelings are going to come up. It might be your partner, it might be your children. At some point, you'll have to deal with these feelings. So the best thing to do is not blame me for making you angry. The best thing for you to do is to deal with your own relationship with that flick and that switch and the feelings that are there,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like,
And these
even
so
they get
emotionally
it.
intelligent.
This
It's
is the
so
thing.
incredible. Yeah.
They get
Because wouldn't
it.
you have, like, that was probably one of the things where I was like, but why didn't anyone tell me? Because there was so many times in my early teens, late teens, that if someone had have just pointed me to, hey, you actually feel a lot of grief right now, so you're making really bad decisions based on this suppressed grief from your earlier life.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, I would have picked some better choices, but I was
Yes.
acting from rage at my parents. So I was
Yeah.
doing things that would get back at them in order to somehow pay them back without
Yeah.
having any idea. Or I was having relationships with friends and boyfriends that were driven by a grief of a lack of connection. And so
Yeah.
they weren't actually true and authentic and divine alignment, they were wounded connections. So
Yep.
yeah, it's powerful. It's so
It
powerful.
really
They're
is.
so blessed. Like, there's so much, the kids that are coming through. And if you're listening to this podcast today, you are definitely on the way to being a parent who, because you're listening and you're willing to listen to this conversation.
Yeah.
Our children just have so much more freedom in themselves to be and be with what has been going on for them. And
Yeah.
when we can acknowledge it in ourselves, that's what I mean by the compassion and empathy, is that you just become more humble.
Yeah.
You become more humble to, oh, I stuffed up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was so impressed actually. Like, in reality, I love that you said that. If you're here, you're ready, or you're here, you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because this kind of information is repulsive to people who aren't ready for
Yeah.
it. It
Totally.
is. And it is like, you cannot make people do this work. You really can't. This work, and so many people say this, I experienced it myself, and so many people at the Reconnected talk about how this work just found them at the exact right time.
Yeah.
And it's because of a readiness that you might not even consciously recognize. And I can acknowledge and recognize that this work and this way of being in the world came to me when I was fully ready for it. And for me, I had to be in a lot of pain before I was ready for it.
Yeah.
But I look at the kids of today, like my teenagers, and in that conversation we had last night, there's there's readiness.
Yeah.
There's readiness. Like they get it. They're so emotionally intelligent. They're open. It lands. They understand it. I know 40-year-olds who, if I tried to
Yeah,
explain
no
this to
way.
them, they wouldn't be able to understand it, or
Because
they
they're
would
still
have
stuck in
to.
the blame and the
Yeah.
victim and the finger pointing, and then no,
Yeah.
I didn't do it. They
They
did it.
did it.
They
Yeah.
did everything. I am not doing anything. It's all them. Yeah,
Blame is 100% a sign of suppressed emotion.
yeah,
And I want to, it's similar to energy as denial, blame and denial. When
yeah,
we blame someone, we're denying something. Yeah. And this is where I want to leave the conversation, I feel, because a lot of people have a feeling of wanting other people to do this work. Like,
yeah.
hands
I
up
want my
right now.
partner to
Who
do
wants
it
their
right
partner to do
now.
this work? You
Yeah.
know, ever like
I will admit, when I was going through my training, I did try and drag my mother into the
I was
scenario.
gonna say, and then who wants their parents to do the work? Who
She
wants
was
their
getting some
parents?
aggressive texts saying, like, it's time for you.
Yeah. And
Sorry,
one of
mom.
the things about suppression, denial, inhibition, and avoidance is we really have to revere these things.
Yes,
We have to
totally.
revere them,
Yeah,
because there's layers of pain, and if someone was able to be with those feelings underneath, then they would, and as soon as they can, they will, and there's
yeah.
always a really valid reason why they can't just resolve all of these feelings. Yeah.
In
And
one go. Yeah. And I want to say that, in the yogic science, they say recognize the other as you. And that is so when we do our own work and we open up these spaces within ourselves to be more vulnerable, more accepting, more humble, more gracious, more empathetic, it gives permission for others to do that around us as well. And I have experienced that firsthand when I stopped trying to pass the buck of healing onto others and I just went for it for myself.
mm,
It started to freely open up for the people around me to want to do it as well, without
mm,
having to push them, without
yeah,
having to drag them into the scenario.
yeah,
They could just see the level of freedom that I was experiencing on all levels of my life,
mm,
and it was inspiring them to do the same.
mm-hmm,
Yeah,
yeah, that's exactly it. Whew.
I know.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We're going to talk in the next podcast around how we can get out of this, and how we can get out of cycles of suppression and denial and inhibition and
Yeah, how we can
avoidance.
stay with what is arising and be truly safe in those big feelings that we have been hiding from
Yeah.
for God knows how long. But thank you so much, everyone.
Please let us know on social media. Give us a
Yeah,
tag. Let us
and I just
join in
want
the
to give you a little
conversation.
prompt.
Yeah.
Jump into our Reconnected app. If you go to the App
Oh,
Store
true.
on iTunes or the Google Store, it's called Reconnected app. And it is where we're going to have all these podcasts laid out for you. And we are starting to get into getting everyone into our big free community. And we're going to be dropping lots of fun little projects and information in there. So if you're in there, you're going to get the first ping of the notification.
And we'd love
So
to hear a share about what from this conversation stood out to you. Tag us
yeah,
on social media at The Reconnected,
yeah.
or jump in and join the conversation inside of the app. We so appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. See you on the next podcast.